A black factory worker with 12 years of experience was denied a promotion without explanation. 3 weeks later, that same man returned, exposing the entire management board, firing senior executives, and overhauling the whole system. But what shocked the entire factory wasn't what he did. It was who he was. Someone no one ever imagined. Have you ever wondered? What if the person you looked down on today is the one holding the power to change your fate tomorrow? And if justice comes in disguise, would you treat it fairly? Before you knew who it was? Blank. Underscore. Blank. The evening shift began with a sharp whistle echoing through the electronics manufacturing plant on the outskirts of Ohio. The air reeked of molten plastic, soldered metal, and the sweat that had accumulated over long hours of labor. Assembly lines screeched in a steady rhythm, like the never-resting heartbeat of an industrial beast. At the end of the third-floor hallway, where the supervisor's office was located, a black man stood silently before a door that had just slammed shut. He said nothing. He merely tightened his grip on the returned application form, across which the word, "rejected," had been scrawled carelessly in red ink. No one paid him any attention. In everyone's eyes, he was just another worker who had been passed over for a promotion, something that happened almost every month at this plant. But what they didn't know, that man was Marcus Brown, or at least, that was the name he was using. Marcus had dedicated 12 years to this factory. He had never been late, not once, and had never made a single product error. He was the one who stayed late to help colleagues, who willingly covered shifts for those who were sick. His record was spotless, his performance exceptional, and his promotion application, meticulously prepared with performance reviews and safety certifications, had been submitted to management with a well-earned sense of hope. But all of that was answered with just a passing glance at his file, and a single sentence from manager Carl that made Marcus feel not only rejected, but excluded. "I just think you're not ready. This position needs someone with more leadership qualities. Someone who fits better with the culture of this team." That sentence didn't need to be spelled out. Marcus had heard it in many forms throughout his life, when applying to college, when interviewing for engineering roles, and now, once again. The same meaning, just different words. Carl asked no further questions, gave no further consideration, not a single word of encouragement, not a thank you, just a cold rejection, like pressing decline on a phone call. Marcus turned away, hand clenched around the returned form, each step heavy on the concrete floor. But what stirred in his chest was no longer just disappointment. This time, the feeling carried something deeper, hotter, like an alarm bell ringing inside. This wasn't just about a promotion. This was a crack in the very ideal he had spent years building. This factory, this system, was the place he once believed would never judge by color. But Carl's words, encapsulated in those two dismissive words, "not a fit," felt like a blow to all that faith. Marcus didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't resist. He simply left. But behind that silence was a quiet vow. Calmly, he let out a breath, deep, long, and slow. "All right," he thought, "if they can't see who I am, then maybe it's time I show them exactly who I am." And from that moment, in that third-floor hallway, a storm of justice began to take shape. No one at the plant could have imagined that the man they had just pushed out through that cold, indifferent door was the very one who had the power to unlock the entire system from within. Blank. Underscore. Blank. Night fell slowly over the industrial zone in southern Ohio. The ashen sky hung heavy over the factory like a suffocating blanket after a long, weary day. In the parking lot, a few workers' cars rumbled to life and pulled away, leaving behind a single black SUV, sitting silently at the far end of the row. Inside, Marcus sat still, the soft glow from the dashboard lights reflecting off his contemplative cheek. No one knew that the man in the worn-out worker's uniform today was, in fact, Marcus Lee, founder and chairman of Lee Tech Industries, a manufacturing empire with over 100 factories and tens of thousands of employees across the country. There had been no grand opening ceremonies, no portraits hanging in corridors, no quarterly speeches. Marcus had deliberately chosen to remain anonymous at the very first plant he had built, the one where he had once worked as a janitor, scrubbing floors with his own hands, fixing light bulbs, and listening to the forgotten stories of the silent laboring class. He once said, when Lee Tech was founded, "I don't want to be a CEO sitting in an ivory tower. I want to be someone who understands every creak of the conveyor belt, every sigh in the lunchroom, and every dream suffocated by injustice." That's why, over the years, Marcus had kept his distance from fame. He appeared quietly at conferences, declined brand photo shoots, and every time he visited a factory, it was unannounced, eating lunch with the workers, sitting in a corner of the shop floor instead of the VIP room. But this time, it wasn't just another visit. This time, Marcus was no longer a distant CEO merely observing. This time, he had to become the very person being discriminated against, to feel the pain not through data, but through glances, gestures, and words sharp as blades. And he had felt it, clearly, in Carl's gaze, in his subtly venomous phrase, "You're not the right fit." Marcus wasn't surprised, but he was hurt, not because his honor had been bruised, but because his ideals, the ones he had built with the fervor of youth, were now being distorted by the very people who carried them. From the glove compartment, Marcus pulled out a folder, his promotion application, carefully prepared. On the first page, instead of the name, Marcus Lee, was the alias he had used for this undercover assignment, Tony Davis. A name without glory, without resonance, without power. Just a black man seeking opportunity within a ruthless system. He looked at the photo clipped to the file, taken with an old phone. His face looked different, clean-shaven, wearing round glasses, dressed in a faded uniform. He exhaled deeply. No titles, no power, only the truth. Let's see how they treat the truth. In the shadowed interior of the car, Marcus opened his phone and typed a short message. The recipient was Linda Chen, Vice President of Human Resources, and his most trusted ally for over 15 years. The message contained just 3 words: activate the plan. His phone vibrated almost instantly. Linda was calling, her voice calm but commanding. "Are you sure? Once we begin, there's no turning back." Marcus smiled, a faint trace of sorrow behind it. "All the more reason we can't stop, if we let injustice keep repeating in silence." The call ended, and with it, a silent but determined war was officially underway. Starting tomorrow, this factory will no longer just run machines. It would run the most intense trial in latex history. A man would become a ghost of himself, to expose all that had been hidden beneath the names of procedure, company culture, and fit. And as the black SUV pulled out of the lot and the night swallowed the streets, within Marcus, a fire for justice had ignited, unstoppable and unquenchable. Blank. Blank. The next morning, autumn sunlight streamed into the factory through tall, dust-streaked windows, casting a pale yellow hue over the gray cement floor. The start-of-day atmosphere seemed calm. But for Marcus, or rather, Tony Davis, every sense was on high alert. He stepped into the canteen with a simple tray in hand, 2 slices of cold bread, a slightly burnt fried egg, and a cup of watery coffee. No one recognized that the man sitting silently in the corner today was the very person who once signed off on every piece of equipment in the workshop. Eyes slid past him as if he were just another nameless object. Marcus sat at an empty table near the back, where he could hear conversations from nearby tables but remain distant enough not to attract attention. And then, the conversation began, not loud, not angry, but in that familiar hush shared only between those who lived the same quiet struggle. At the table behind him were 2 black men, one around 30. Dressed in a faded gray shirt, his face clouded with fatigue, the other younger, with greasy stains still on his hands, stirring his coffee as if trying to dissolve the frustration within him. "It's been 3 years. I've applied for the shift lead position 6 times. No response. No explanation," the older man said in a low voice, barely audible over the hum of the vending machine. "Tim got promoted last week," the younger one muttered, lips curling, unclear whether in sarcasm or quiet defeat. "Been here 6 months. White guy. Didn't even finish high school. But hey, cultural fit. Right?" Silence fell between them, a silence that needed no explanation, no elaboration, because they both understood. Marcus froze. Those words sliced into him like tiny blades, cutting deep into old memories, stories his mother once told, about how his father had been repeatedly rejected for a warehouse supervisor job simply because he wasn't a good fit for the communication team. He stared down at his tray, untouched. The hunger in his stomach was nothing compared to the slow-burning anger rising within. "They don't say it directly, but we know," the younger man continued, his voice softer now. "It's like, we'll tolerate you being here, as long as you don't dream beyond the role we've allowed." Marcus drew a deep breath, not to calm himself, but to hold back the storm of emotions clawing at his chest. He knew exactly what they were saying was true, and what hurt even more was that it was happening in the very factory he had built. "I used to think this place was different," the older man went on. "When I heard about a black owner at Lee Tech, I thought, finally, someone who understands us. But somewhere between the paperwork and the steel lines, he must have forgotten." The sentence struck like a slap. Marcus looked up, staring into the space in front of him, a lump rising in his throat. No, he hadn't forgotten, but perhaps he had trusted too much in the reports, the polished numbers crafted to appease the executive board. yet never truly reflecting the realities on the front lines. Those numbers had blinded him. He needed these voices, these whispers that got brushed aside in every strategic meeting. If someone who looks like us doesn't even protect us, the younger man said, his voice rasping, then who do we trust? A heavy silence settled over the table. Marcus clenched his fists. Inside him, a slow-burning resolve solidified into an unwavering command. This had to be uncovered. Fully. And publicly. They didn't know it yet. But their words today would ignite a seismic shift of power unlike anything this factory had ever seen. Blank. Underscore. Blank. That night, the city lay beneath a veil of thin mist. Streetlights casting long shadows on the rain-slick asphalt. In a small apartment on the city's west side, nothing like the penthouse Marcus usually called home. The gentle sounds of scissors snipping fabric and makeup kits being opened filled the air. Yet every movement carried the weight of ritual, a preparation for a silent war. Standing before the mirror, Marcus slowly removed his glasses, took off his tailored dress shirt, and replaced it with a faded t-shirt. The collar slightly stretched. He bowed his head as Linda, his most trusted companion of 15 years, carefully shaved the regrown stubble on his face, trimmed the hairline, and dotted a few faint freckles on his cheeks using professional stage makeup techniques. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Linda asked, eyes focused on every precise touch. Marcus nodded, his voice low and firm. "I no longer trust reports. I need to see with my own eyes. Hear with my ears. No business card, no title, just me, and how they truly treat someone like me." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded silently. On the table lay a meticulously prepared personnel file, standard technical qualifications, modest work history, a temporary address in the outskirts, all just right for a seasonal worker applying for a job without raising suspicion. His name on the paperwork now read, Tony Davis. The Rolex watch was removed, replaced with a cheap plastic one. His sleek designer frames were swapped for thick, old-fashioned glasses. Even his posture was retrained, no longer upright and assertive like the familiar CEO, but slightly stooped, with soft, almost cautious footsteps meant to avoid drawing attention. "You'll be alone. No protection. No intervention," Linda reminded him. "I don't need protection," Marcus replied quietly. "I need to see the truth. Unfiltered." The next morning, a small truck pulled up at the main gate of Lee Tech Factory number 14. Among the new hires stepping down was a middle-aged man. Expressionless face, worn jacket, thick glasses, and a faded fabric cap, blending into the crowd like just another nameless figure among hundreds of nameless figures. No one knew that this man was, in fact, the chairman of the entire system, the same man who had once spoken on national television about the philosophy of justice from the production line. Inside Marcus, his veins throbbed with anticipation, not out of fear of being discovered, but because he was about to step into the true heart of the very system he had once trusted completely. Every gesture, glance, and tone of voice from the supervisor welcoming new workers was being recorded by a hidden camera in a shirt button and a disguised audio recorder in a pen. "I don't need anyone to put on a show for me anymore," Marcus whispered silently to himself. "Show me your real face. standing among dozens of other workers during orientation. Marcus scanned the room, many eyes dull with exhaustion, while others shimmered faintly with hope for a better future. He knew that if he didn't speak out, if he didn't shatter the mask covering these injustices, then the light in those eyes would eventually be snuffed out, just like so many others who had passed through here, quietly, hopelessly, and without a trace. And this time, he wouldn't let that happen again. Marcus's first day, as Tony Davis, began with the acrid smell of machine grease and the shrill hiss of compressed air through old pipes. He was assigned to Assembly Team 3, the unit responsible for handling intricate circuit board components, a stage that required high precision and seamless coordination. In the dispatch room, the shift manager, Rick, a white man with a bald head, bulging belly, and a voice as dry as if coming from a machine, skimmed through the list of new workers and called out loudly, "Hector, Machine 5, Joseph, Machine 7, Emily, pair with Sarah at Machine 2, Tony Davis." He paused, gave Marcus a glance, his eyes barely hiding the indifference. "You're on Machine 12, train with Group D." No further explanation, no assigned mentor, no orientation map, just a dismissive gesture toward the far end of the factory, where old machines stood in a dim corner. And 3 workers tinkered separately, each moving at their own pace, out of sync with one another. Marcus nodded and made his way there. On the walk, he happened to glance across the workshop, where a group of mostly white new hires were being attentively guided by a technician wearing a training support badge. Each step was carefully demonstrated, every button explained. They were even handed full-color instruction manuals. One was offered coffee right in the middle of orientation. Another dropped a screw, and a supervisor rushed over to pick it up and give him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Just a tiny slip. You're new. It'll come with time." But on Marcus's side, he sat down at Machine 12. The screen blinked with a system error. No one came. No one asked. The worker beside him glanced, then looked away. "Don't expect anyone to teach you." A voice came from behind. It was Malik, a longtime black worker. "Unless you're white or know someone, self-teaching is your only option around here." Marcus said nothing. He simply watched and observed. For 4 straight hours, he quietly taught himself how to operate the machine. He squinted at a blurry digital schematic, double-checked each step. He made a minor mistake, not because he lacked skill, but because no one had told him the software had been updated 2 months ago. A technician passing by saw the issue but didn't explain. Instead, he barked, "Focus. If you're already making mistakes on day 1, how do you expect to get promoted?" A few stifled laughs came from the next table. Marcus swallowed his response. He knew, if today he were his real self, Marcus Lee, every single person here would have treated him differently. But they didn't know, and that was exactly what he needed. He needed to witness it all with no filter of title or status. He glanced briefly at the hidden camera sewn into his shirt button, quietly recording every expression. Every word, every dismissive gesture, every sneer masked as politeness. Mid-shift, the break bell rang. The canteen buzzed like a beehive. Marcus chose an empty table in the corner and set down his tray. Once again, no one sat beside him. Those who looked like him, in skin tone. In background, were scattered in small, quiet clusters. Meanwhile, another group, mostly white, laughed and chatted openly at the center of the room. No signs posted, no official rulebook mandated segregation. But people had already learned to arrange themselves according to an unspoken law, a law without words. But one no one dared to violate. You know, Malik said again, as he took a seat next to Marcus. His voice slow and steady. On my first day, I thought I was welcome. Now I know. Their silence cuts deeper than any rejection. Marcus looked at him but said nothing. He simply nodded. What he was recording now wasn't just personal injustice, it was a system built on quiet favoritism. Where handshakes were for the select few, and invisibility was the fate of many who looked like him. He picked up his coffee spoon and stirred, not to drink, but to keep his hand from clenching too tightly. They think I'm just another man who'll settle, Marcus thought silently. But they'll soon realize, I'm the only one here who truly knows where the real power of justice lies. And that day is coming soon. A week passed. Marcus, as Tony Davis, had grown accustomed to the procedures, understood each stage of the process, and had even begun helping coworkers troubleshoot machine errors. The same people who once avoided him now gave him a slight nod in passing. Malik, the quiet man from the canteen, occasionally shared tips to avoid mistakes on the line. But those changes only existed on the factory floor, where sweat stained the concrete. Upstairs, in management, his name remained invisible. After a grueling night shift, Marcus entered the Human Resources office, where a framed sign boldly hung behind the front desk. We encourage internal growth, advancement opportunities for all. He carried with him a promotion application for the position of shift supervisor, a meticulously prepared file, filled with benchmarked performance scores, a flawless disciplinary record, and a proposed improvement plan that had cut over 8% of energy costs in just the last 3 days. Most importantly, he had earned the trust of the production crew, a fact even night shift lead Malik had personally vouched for. The HR officer, a white woman in her 40s, took the file and glanced at Marcus. I'll forward this to management for review. If you meet the criteria, you'll be called for an internal interview. Marcus nodded. He wasn't asking for favoritism, only fairness. He just wanted the file to be judged on merit, not melanin. 3 days later, his name wasn't on the list of selected interviewees. Tim, a young man who had been at the factory for only 7 months, whom Marcus had helped fix a machine during his first week, was on the list. So was Emily, who had skipped 3 shifts in 1 month but had been praised by supervisors as promising. Marcus walked straight to Rick's office, the direct manager of the assembly unit. Rick was seated at his desk, sipping coffee, a toothpick in his mouth, eyes heavy with fatigue. When Marcus entered, he didn't look up. "What is it, Tony?" Marcus kept his voice steady. "I wanted to ask about my promotion application. I didn't see my name on the list." Rick sighed and set down his cup. "Oh, yeah, I looked it over. Nothing major is wrong. Just didn't see anything outstanding. We're looking for someone with more flexibility in group coordination." Marcus nodded slightly. "I've helped 3 people learn Machine 12. Reduced energy usage for Team 3. proposed improvements to the defect control process last week. I thought those were points worth reviewing. Rick frowned, now slightly irritated. You talk too much, Tony. Sometimes knowing when to stay quiet is a kind of strength. 2. A heavy silence fell across the room. Marcus understood. This wasn't about skill anymore. A gray afternoon draped itself over the factory floor. The sky threatened rain, as heavy as the weight in Marcus's chest after days of silence. Ever since his promotion application was rejected, everything around him seemed to shift in tone. The friendly nods from coworkers had turned hesitant. Those who once chatted with him in the canteen now chose other tables. Even Malik, the most outspoken before, now only watched him from afar, eyes cautious, as if to say, best not to stir the waters further. But Marcus had reached his limit. During break time, he sought out Carl, the senior manager who had labeled him as someone who tends to be disruptive in his internal review. Carl was standing in the supervisor's room, sipping coffee while scrolling through emails on his phone. When he saw Marcus enter, he frowned slightly. Tony, what do you need? Marcus didn't reply immediately. He closed the door behind him and looked Carl straight in the eye, a calm gaze, but one carrying a weight that instinctively made Carl step back ever so slightly. I came to ask you one thing directly. Marcus began. Why was my file rejected? And why did you write that I tend to be disruptive? Carl set his cup down and let out a short, dismissive laugh. You're being too sensitive. Internal evaluations consider many factors. Not everyone gets selected, but the people who were selected have less experience than I do. More operational errors. I only spoke up when I saw something unfair. If that's considered disruptive, then maybe we're living inside a system that's already too distorted. Carl crossed his arms, now visibly impatient. Listen, Tony, around here, we evaluate based on harmony. You come across as too sharp, too eager to prove you're right. That's not healthy for company culture. In other words, Marcus said evenly, I'm not the kind of person who stays quiet in the face of injustice. Carl's frown deepened. The pretense dropped. You're stepping out of line. If you keep confronting management like this, I'll consider it a sign of insubordination. Respect goes both ways, Marcus replied, unflinching. Eliminating someone just because they won't bow their head, that's not leadership. That's control through fear. Silence engulfed the room. Carl inhaled sharply, voice strained. I've heard enough. You're causing disruption. If you don't want to be viewed as a threat to the work environment, I suggest you return to the floor immediately. This is your first and final warning. Marcus smiled faintly, not with anger, but with the certainty of a man who knew exactly what was coming next. I don't need you to like me, but you will have to answer, not to me, but to your own conscience, when that day arrives. He turned and walked out, leaving Carl frozen, unable to comprehend why a seasonal worker spoke as if he were running the entire system. A few hours later, Marcus received a summons from the HR department. The message was short, but sharp. Employee Tony Davis has engaged in unauthorized questioning, negatively impacting team morale. Required to report to administration tomorrow morning. Attached was a single italicized note. Note. May lead to disciplinary action. That night, Marcus sat alone in his temporary apartment. The soft yellow glow of the lamp casting shadows across his rejected application. On the table lay the voice recorder and memory card, now backed up, containing the full recording of his conversation with Carl. Every word, every inflection, every moment when Carl admitted that the evaluation wasn't based on performance but on cultural fit. Marcus knew he had reached the deepest layer of the system, a place where fairness wasn't in the training manuals, where compliance was rewarded, and standing tall meant being cast out. But he wasn't afraid, because if the cost of demanding justice was a formal warning, he was ready to receive dozens. I came here to be rejected, Marcus thought to himself, because only when I'm outside the system can I shatter its illusion from broad daylight. The next morning, dark clouds rolled in earlier than usual, casting a gloomy veil over the Lee Tech factory grounds, like an omen of something about to unfold. Marcus, still under the identity of Tony Davis, arrived on time. Uniform neat, ID badge clipped just right. Same as every other day. But something was different today. The moment he passed through the checkpoint, a security officer stopped him and handed him a white envelope stamped, "Urgent." Inside was an emergency summons from the administrative department. Reason: conduct deemed inappropriate for the workplace, affecting internal stability. Directive: immediate suspension from duties. Await disciplinary proceedings. No explanation, no conversation, just one sentence. Like a blade slicing through all the effort and integrity Marcus had shown. He held the letter in his hand, eyes still, unblinking. The security guard, a young man named Sean, seemed hesitant. I'm just following orders. I hope you understand." Marcus looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet understanding. "I know you're just in the middle. But sometimes, it's the silence of those in the middle that creates mistakes no one can undo." The factory floor buzzed as words spread. Tony Davis, the honest, hard-working worker, had been suspended. Malik heard it from the shift lead. He fell silent for a moment, then murmured, "Another one, removed." But what stunned Malik more was how Marcus walked out of the factory, calm, composed, head held high, not like someone being fired, but like a man withdrawing with purpose. When he reached the front yard of the factory, Marcus didn't leave immediately. He stopped beneath the Lee Tech logo emblazoned on the large wall, the very emblem he had designed when founding the company. A circle to symbolize connection, and a beam of light piercing through it to represent justice throughout the production chain. Today, that emblem was only a shell. Marcus took out his phone, not to call anyone, but to record a video of himself, standing in front of the factory, holding the suspension notice in his hand. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word etched into the air. "I, Tony Davis, was ordered to leave this place simply because I dared to question an unclear decision. I didn't shout. I didn't cause a disturbance. I only asked, why is someone who performs better not being promoted? And this is their answer." He held up the paper, stamped in red. "I'm sharing this so that anyone who's been silent knows. You are not alone. And if a system is afraid of being asked, why, then maybe it's the one that most needs to be questioned." The recording ended. No one knew then that the clip would later be played at a company-wide Lee Tech summit. triggering an unprecedented internal reform. As Marcus approached the factory gate once more, Sean whispered, "I don't understand why this is happening to you, but I hope you come back." Marcus paused, looked at Sean, his gaze full of meaning. "I will come back, but not as Tony Davis. As someone they can't ignore. And when I return, nothing will be the same." He walked away, never looking back. Behind him, the factory kept humming, the machines screeching, hands moving in rhythm, but none of them knew that the man they just pushed out was the only one with the power to change the entire system at its core. And the real storm was just about to begin. That afternoon, the sky had turned gray, distant thunder rumbling like a vague warning from the universe. Marcus drove slowly through the old streets, not to retreat, but to prepare. The days of disguise were over. The simulation was complete. Now, it was time for the real man, with real power, to return. In the car, he opened the document case tucked away in the trunk. Inside was a file documenting everything that had happened over the past 3 weeks. The recorded conversation with Carl. The copy of the internal review was filled with discriminatory language. Hidden camera footage captures supervisors treating workers by 2 different standards. And the video he had recorded that very morning in front of the factory gate. Every page, every second of footage, every spoken line was undeniable evidence. Marcus pulled up in front of a sleek black glass building, the headquarters of Lee Tech Industries. A place he had deliberately avoided for the past 3 weeks to protect the secrecy of his undercover mission. He took out his phone, a black phone, encrypted and reserved solely for high-level communication. The first call, and the most important, was to Linda Chen, Executive Vice President, and his loyal ally since the company's founding days. The voice on the other end picked up after a single ring. Linda Chen speaking. Marcus didn't need to introduce himself. Activate Protocol 6. Summon the entire board of directors, senior HR executives, and internal communications. Emergency meeting at Branch 14, in 3 hours. I want full security footage pulled from the day I started undercover until now. Linda paused, not from shock, but because she understood. The moment had arrived. Are you sure? More than ever. Marcus replied. And I'm not coming as Tony Davis. I'm coming in my true role, the man who built all of this. And who will now rebuild it from the ground up. Linda's voice dropped, steady and firm. Understood. I'll have the internal files locked immediately to prevent any tampering. And I'll be there 30 minutes before you. The call ended. But inside the car, the air remained heavy, like stone. Marcus took a deep breath. In the rearview mirror, he saw his reflection, not the silent worker. Not the man left off the promotion list. Not Tony Davis. But Marcus Lee, founder, CEO. The man who once promised that equality would be the backbone of Lee Tech. Not just a slogan stuck on a wall. He took off the faded jacket, removed the glasses, and unstrapped the cheap plastic watch. In the backseat lay a charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and a gold-plated CEO badge, the symbol of absolute authority in the company. He dressed like a general putting on his armor before battle. Every motion was deliberate, decisive. As he stepped out of the car, the last light of day broke through the clouds. casting a beam directly on the Lee Tech logo atop the headquarters. That light hit Marcus's back like a silent halo heralding his return. He entered another car, this time not a rental, but his VIP-plated sedan, instantly recognized by the Lee Tech headquarters guards. They bowed as he passed, unaware that this very man had been expelled from a branch just the day before. For being disruptive, Marcus didn't return the gesture. Not out of pride, but to keep his emotions from spilling too soon. It's time to return names to those who were misnamed. To return positions to those who were cast aside. And above all, to return justice to the very place I once called my pride. And with that, he walked inside, toward the meeting that would rewrite the history of Lee Tech. Branch 14, the oldest factory in the Lee Tech system, became eerily silent that afternoon. Supervisors were suddenly summoned. Internal emails popped up, marked with bold red subject lines. URGENT. All personnel must report to the main hall at 1 p.m. sharp. Absences will be subject to disciplinary action. No one knew what was going on. Rick, Carl, and other members of the management team were visibly nervous. Whispers spread among the workers. Heard someone was secretly filming the factory. Looks like there's an internal audit happening. I think someone's getting sued for discrimination. Everyone speculated. No one suspected that the man about to walk through the front doors was the very same person they had once dismissed as a nameless troublemaker. 1:01 p.m. The glass doors to the main lobby slid open. A lone figure stepped in, dressed in a charcoal gray suit. Back straight, walking with such composure that even the floor tiles seemed to recognize him. No one spoke, no one greeted him, but slowly, eyes began to widen, and people began to step back. Carl, standing beside Linda Chen, froze mid-sip. "Wait, is that?" Rick stammered, face pale as ash. No way. That's Marcus Lee." And yes, it was. Marcus walked straight to the small platform usually used for internal announcements. No microphone, no backdrop. Just his presence alone made the entire room hold its breath. He removed the gold-plated CEO badge from his suit lapel and held it high for all to see. The ceiling lights glinted off the surface, shining like an undeniable truth. "I am Marcus Lee, the founder, the funder, and the one ultimately responsible for everything that has happened, and is happening, here." Silence blanketed the room. Somewhere, a female worker dropped her coffee cup. The tiny shatter echoed like a stifled sob. Marcus scanned the room, not with anger, not with a raised voice, but with an intensity sharper than any blade. "Just yesterday, I, under the name Tony Davis, was expelled from the very factory I founded. For asking one question. Why is someone who performs better not being promoted?" He held up the suspension notice. Its red stamp still fresh. "This was your answer." Carl stepped forward, lips trembling. "Mr. Lee, I didn't know. If I had known it was you." Marcus raised his hand, stopping him cold. "Exactly. You didn't know who I was. And that's the entire point. You shouldn't need to know my name to treat me with fairness. You only needed to know that I was human." Linda Chen joined Marcus, handing a USB drive to the technical team. In seconds, the large screen behind the platform lit up and began to play. Footage of Tony Davis being ignored during training. Carl says, "We need someone easier to manage." Rick rejected a promotion request, citing not fitting the culture. And finally, Carl orders Marcus off the premises with the chilling line, "If you won't stay quiet, then this isn't the place for you." The entire hall fell into stunned silence. There was no defense, no place to hide. Marcus nodded at Linda. She stepped up and read clearly, word for word, per executive board orders. Mr. Carl Thompson is terminated immediately for discriminatory behavior and abuse of power. Rick Dawson is suspended indefinitely pending further investigation. All promotion applications from the past 6 months will be re-evaluated in full transparency. An independent audit team will be deployed to begin systemic reform. Marcus stepped forward again. This time, he was not just a CEO. He was a man who had once been stripped of his name, and now stood with nothing but dignity. "I founded Lee Tech with a promise that no one would be judged for the color of their skin, the way they spoke, or for having the courage to speak up. And today, I fulfill that promise, not with words, but with action." He turned toward the back of the hall, where Malik and many others who had once been silent now stood, stunned, unsure if what they were witnessing was real. Marcus pointed to them. "Those who were once ignored, starting today, you will be at the center of change. I'll personally review every one of your files. No more cycles of silence." And then, as if by reflex, the room erupted in applause. Not thunderous, not synchronized, but scattered, emotional, choked with meaning, like a collective, unspoken apology. Carl, Rick, they stood frozen, faces drained of all color. They weren't just exposed in front of the entire factory. They had just witnessed true power step out from the shadows, powered by the very justice they once twisted. Silence. That was all that remained after the screen faded to black. No more whispers, no awkward chuckles. Even those who had once silently sided with Carl now stood with their heads down, eyes avoiding Marcus's gaze. Marcus stayed silent for a few seconds, intentionally, because he knew, sometimes, the silence that follows the revelation of truth carries more weight than any accusation. He stepped forward, eyes fixed on Carl and Rick, both standing as if turned to stone. No more traces of authority. No senior management posture. Just two men, caught red-handed, with nowhere left to run. Marcus looked them straight in the eye. His voice was low, but it rang through the entire room like a drumbeat. "I don't need your apologies. I don't need your justifications. I just need you to leave, because you no longer have the right to remain." Linda Chen, standing beside Marcus, nodded to the elite security team. Carl Thompson and Rick Dawson, by order of the executive board. You are hereby terminated immediately for violations of corporate ethics, discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and obstruction of fair advancement. The soft clink of metal was heard as their senior employee badges were revoked, accompanied by their system access being deactivated on the central screen. Several HR staff stood motionless, not in regret, but in awe. For the first time in LeTech's history, a high-level dismissal had occurred publicly, in front of the entire workforce. But this was only the beginning. Marcus turned back to face the entire room. His voice was clear, resolute, and unwavering. Today will go down in LeTech's history not because someone got fired, but because we are rebuilding the foundation of trust. He raised a folder. Over the next 30 days, Linda and I will personally review all promotion records, complaints, and employee feedback across the entire system. Every unjustified rejection will be re-evaluated. Every sidelined worker will be invited back for a fair interview. Linda stepped forward to add, firmly, beginning today, all LeTech factories will implement a full-scale anonymous auditing program. Each quarter, we will dispatch undercover evaluators into different departments to assess how our system truly functions from the inside. The room stirred. Gasps. Quiet sobs. Not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that justice could truly be this close. Marcus looked directly at the workers. We will establish a labor fairness commission, composed of workers, engineers, department representatives, and independent overseers. Anyone who feels they've been treated unfairly can file a complaint and will receive a response within 5 business days. No more buried files. No more vague talk of cultural fit. No more silence out of fear. He stepped off the stage and walked toward Malik, the man who had once confided in Marcus during lunch breaks. His disappointment worn over 3 long years. Marcus extended his hand and shook it firmly. I listened to you as Tony Davis. Now, I want to invite you, as yourself, to be the first official member of the Fairness Commission. Malik froze. Words failed him, but his tear-filled eyes and solemn nod said everything that needed to be said. After the announcement, Marcus didn't leave right away. He walked through the factory, shaking hands with workers. No more barriers, no more titles, just human meeting human, in a quiet reaffirmation that fairness is not a privilege, but a basic right. And on the massive front gate of the factory, where a sign once read, "Quality is honor," a new board had been mounted, personally signed off by Marcus. LeTech, where every person is measured by their value, not their skin, their name, or their silence. 3 days later, late afternoon, the sun was setting, casting golden light over the industrial zone in the southern part of the city. A soft breeze flowed over the faded tin rooftops, drifting gently past the small canteen in the corner of the yard, where quiet conversations still unfolded each day among workers who had rarely been heard. Marcus, no longer Tony Davis, and not quite the commanding CEO Marcus Lee either, returned as a man to the place that had reawakened a truth long buried inside him. He wore the same old jacket he had worn on his first undercover day. Walking slowly into the factory canteen. No entourage, no escort, just him, with a gentle smile and a warm, steady gaze. In the far corner, in the very spot they had sat before, were 2 black workers, the same 2 Marcus had once overheard speaking. I thought this place would be different, because someone like us founded it. If even he can't help us, then who will? They didn't recognize him at first. One of them looked up, puzzled, then froze. Marcus gave a nod, stepped closer, and extended his hand. Forgive me for eavesdropping on your conversation the other day, but it was that conversation that changed everything. The 2 men were silent for a moment. Then one blurted out, "You're Marcus Lee?" The CEO? The guy who got kicked out? Marcus nodded softly. Not kicked out. I'd say I was seen clearly. He sat down across from them, pulling 2 sheets of paper from a slim document folder. I've reviewed your files. Both of you meet, actually, exceed the qualifications for the shift lead position. He paused, his eyes meeting theirs, not as a superior, but as an equal, making an honest invitation. I'd like to invite you to headquarters next week. Not just for a new interview, but to help me redesign our entire training and development system, from the perspective of those who were once ignored. The 2 looked at each other. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then one gently placed his hand over his heart and nodded. I never thought our voices would ever be heard. Marcus replied, voice low and warm. No one should have to shout just to be heard. In the new Lee Tech, being human is all it takes to be respected. On his way out, Marcus paused at the rules board outside the canteen. Just beneath the newly updated company motto, a small bronze plaque had been mounted, dedicated to the silent voices. Because of them, justice found its voice. He smiled. This journey was never just about exposing, or firing, or restructuring. It was about restoring the spirit Marcus had once poured into Lee Tech. A spirit lost in polished reports and hollow management systems. This was not an ending. It was a promise that here, from this day forward, every person would be measured by their true worth. Every dream would be free from the weight of bias. And justice would never have to wear a disguise again. Today's story isn't just about a man who overturned an entire system with nothing but silence and belief. It's about all the people who were ever overlooked, pushed aside, or labeled not a good fit, simply because they were different. Maybe you've been one of them. Maybe you're living that reality right now. But remember this. If you stay true to your worth, the truth will rise, and justice never arrives late. Rock, have you ever been judged unfairly because of your appearance, your background, or your honesty? Share your story in the comments below. Because who knows, your voice could be the light someone else needs. Loudspeaker, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, soul-stirring stories like this one. We're not just watching, we're building a community rooted in truth, courage, and justice.